At 93 years old, I have learned something most people never realize until it is too late. What you eat quietly writes the story of your life. Every meal is a decision your body remembers. Every habit leaves a mark on your blood, your arteries, your bones, and even your mind. And if there is one question people ask me more than any other, it is this: what kind of protein should we eat if we want to stay healthy for a long time? For most of my life, the world has been divided into two camps. On one side, there is animal protein, meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. These foods have been praised for generations as the gold standard of nutrition. Doctors often say they contain complete proteins, meaning all the essential amino acids the body needs. On the other side, there is soy protein, a plant-based source that has become more popular in recent decades. Soybeans, tofu, tempeh, and soy milk have been embraced by people looking for healthier or more sustainable ways to eat. But here is the real question that many people struggle with. If both provide protein, which one actually supports better health over the long run? Is animal protein truly the superior fuel for the body, as tradition suggests? Or could soy protein, a plant-based alternative, offer advantages that many people have overlooked? At my age, I have seen dietary ideas come and go like seasons. I have watched foods praised as miracles and later blamed for illness. But over the decades, one thing became clear to me: not all proteins affect the body in the same way. So today, I want to share what I have learned through a lifetime of observation, reading, and careful attention to how the body responds to what we eat, because the answer to this question may surprise you. Let me begin with something many people misunderstand about protein. For most of the 20th century, the conversation about protein focused almost entirely on one idea: completeness. Nutrition experts often explained that animal foods were superior because they contained all the essential amino acids the human body needs. Meat, eggs, dairy, and fish were described as complete proteins, while many plant foods were labeled incomplete. When I was a young woman, that idea shaped the way people ate. Families believed a meal was not truly nourishing unless there was meat on the table. Protein was associated with strength, recovery, and vitality, and animal products were seen as the most reliable source. And in one sense, that view was not entirely wrong. Animal proteins do contain all 9 essential amino acids in proportions that closely match the body's needs. They are also highly digestible, meaning the body can absorb and use them efficiently. For people concerned with building muscle or preventing deficiency, these qualities have real value. But as the decades passed and nutritional science developed, researchers began to ask a deeper question. Protein quality is not the only factor that matters for health. The source of protein brings with it many other compounds that influence the body in powerful ways. This is where the comparison between soy protein and animal protein becomes much more interesting. Soybeans are unusual among plant foods because they also contain all 9 essential amino acids. In other words, soy protein is considered a complete protein as well. This alone surprised many people when it first became widely known, because it challenged the assumption that plant proteins were automatically inferior. But soy foods offer something else that animal foods do not provide: naturally occurring phytonutrients. Soy contains compounds called isoflavones, which belong to a group of plant chemicals known as phytoestrogens. These molecules can interact gently with the body's hormone receptors, and for years they sparked intense debate in the nutrition world. Some people worried that phytoestrogens might disrupt hormones. Others suspected they might actually protect the body in certain ways. Over time, a growing number of studies began to examine populations where soy consumption was traditionally high, particularly in parts of East Asia. In these regions, soy foods such as tofu, miso, tempeh, and soy milk had been eaten regularly for generations. Researchers noticed that these populations often experienced lower rates of certain chronic diseases, especially heart disease. While many factors contribute to health outcomes, soy consumption appeared to be part of a broader dietary pattern associated with long-term well-being. One of the clearest differences between soy protein and many animal proteins lies in their effect on cholesterol. Animal products, especially red meat and full-fat dairy, often contain significant amounts of saturated fat and dietary cholesterol. These compounds can raise levels of LDL cholesterol in the bloodstream, sometimes called bad cholesterol. Elevated LDL levels are associated with an increased risk of plaque formation in arteries, which over time can contribute to cardiovascular disease. Soy protein, in contrast, contains no cholesterol and very little saturated fat. In fact, several clinical studies have shown that replacing animal protein with soy protein can modestly reduce LDL cholesterol levels. This does not mean that every animal food is harmful or that soy is a miracle ingredient. Nutrition rarely works in such simple extremes, but the differences are meaningful when we look at long-term patterns of eating. Another factor that deserves attention is fiber. Animal foods contain no dietary fiber at all. Fiber exists only in plant foods, and it plays a crucial role in digestive health, blood sugar control, and the balance of bacteria in the gut. Whole soy foods, such as edamame or tofu made from whole soybeans, provide both protein and fiber. This combination helps slow digestion and stabilize blood glucose levels after meals. Over many years, that effect may support metabolic health and reduce the risk of conditions such as type 2 diabetes. There is also the question of inflammation. Some researchers believe that diets high in processed meats and certain animal fats may promote low-grade inflammation in the body. Chronic inflammation has been linked with a wide range of diseases, including cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, and even cognitive decline. Plant-based foods, including soy, often contain antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds that may help counteract these processes. But I want to be very clear about something. The real comparison is not simply between soybeans and steak sitting on two plates. The larger issue is the pattern of diet in which those foods appear. A diet built around whole plant foods, beans, grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, tends to include fiber, vitamins, minerals, and protective plant compounds. When soy protein appears within that kind of diet, it becomes part of a system that supports metabolic balance. Animal protein, on the other hand, often appears in diets that include fewer plant foods and higher amounts of saturated fat, refined carbohydrates, and excess calories. In other words, protein sources rarely act alone. They travel with the entire structure of a person's daily meals. Throughout my life, I have watched many people believe that health depends on a single miracle nutrient. But the truth is quieter and more complex than that. What matters most is not just how much protein we eat, but where it comes from and what comes with it. By the time I reached my 70s, I began paying closer attention to this difference. I started observing how people around me aged. Some stayed energetic well into their 80s and 90s. Others developed heart disease, diabetes, or chronic inflammation much earlier. The patterns were not identical for everyone, but one theme appeared again and again: diets rich in plant foods, including plant proteins like soy, often supported better long-term health outcomes. That observation made me reconsider something I had believed for most of my youth. Maybe the question is not simply which protein is stronger or more complete. Maybe the more important question is which protein supports the body gently and sustainably over many decades. And that is exactly what we must explore next. By the time I entered my 80s, I began to look at protein in a different way. When you are young, you think about strength, muscle, and energy. But when you grow older, the question changes. You start asking a quieter but more important question. Which foods allow the body to keep working smoothly for the longest time? Longevity is not just about surviving many years. It is about how the body ages during those years. The condition of the heart, the flexibility of the blood vessels, the stability of blood sugar, the clarity of the mind. These things become far more important than the simple number of grams of protein on a plate. And this is where the comparison between soy protein and animal protein becomes even more meaningful. Let us begin with the heart. Cardiovascular disease remains one of the most common health problems around the world. Over many decades, scientists have examined how different types of protein influence heart health. One observation appears again and again in research. Diets that replace some animal protein with plant-based protein often show improvements in cardiovascular markers. Soy protein has received particular attention in this area. Studies have shown that regular soy consumption can help reduce LDL cholesterol levels. The effect is not dramatic, but it is consistent. When soy replaces certain animal proteins in the diet, cholesterol levels often move in a healthier direction. This happens for several reasons. First, soy contains very little saturated fat. Second, it contains compounds such as isoflavones that may support vascular function. And third, soy foods often appear within diets that include many other plant foods, which together create a protective environment for the cardiovascular system. Animal protein, on the other hand, varies widely depending on the source. Fish, for example, can provide omega-3 fatty acids that support heart health. Eggs contain important nutrients such as choline. Lean poultry can be a relatively moderate source of saturated fat. But other forms of animal protein, particularly processed meats and certain cuts of red meat, have been associated with increased risks of cardiovascular disease, when consumed frequently over many years. So the comparison is not simply plant versus animal. It is about the overall biological effect of different protein patterns. Another issue worth considering is metabolic health. As people age, the body becomes less efficient at regulating blood sugar. Insulin sensitivity may decline, and the risk of type 2 diabetes increases. Diet plays an important role in how this process unfolds. Plant-based proteins, including soy, are often consumed alongside fiber-rich foods such as whole grains, legumes, and vegetables. Fiber slows digestion and helps prevent sudden spikes in blood glucose. This creates a more stable metabolic environment throughout the day. Animal proteins, especially when eaten with refined carbohydrates or highly processed foods, can contribute to dietary patterns that destabilize blood sugar over time. Again, the protein itself is only part of the story. The surrounding dietary environment matters just as much. Now let us talk about something many people worry about when considering plant proteins, amino acids. For many years, people believed plant proteins could not adequately support the body because they lacked certain essential amino acids. This concern has largely been misunderstood. Soy protein is one of the few plant proteins that contains all 9 essential amino acids in sufficient amounts. Its amino acid profile is remarkably balanced. While its digestibility may be slightly lower than some animal proteins, it still provides adequate protein for the body when consumed as part of a varied diet. In other words, soy can support muscle maintenance, tissue repair, and normal metabolic function. In fact, many athletes and active individuals successfully use soy protein as part of their nutrition strategies. Another important consideration is long-term inflammation. Chronic inflammation develops slowly over many years. It is often invisible in the early stages, but can contribute to diseases such as heart disease, arthritis, and certain forms of cancer. Dietary patterns rich in plant foods, including soy, tend to contain antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds. These substances help neutralize oxidative stress within the body. Certain animal-based diets, particularly those high in processed meats or saturated fats, may promote inflammatory pathways when consumed excessively. That does not mean all animal protein is harmful, but balance becomes critical. As I watched friends and neighbors grow older, I noticed something interesting. The people who maintained the best health in their 70s and 80s were rarely those who followed extreme diets. Instead, they tended to eat simpler meals built around whole foods. Many of them included beans, lentils, and soy products regularly. They ate vegetables every day. Their meals were modest, balanced, and consistent. Their bodies seem to age more slowly. And this observation brings us to a deeper point. The human body is not designed to handle nutritional extremes for long periods of time. It responds best to steady nourishment, foods that provide energy, micronutrients, and metabolic stability without placing unnecessary strain on the organs. When animal protein dominates the diet, especially in large quantities, the body must process higher levels of saturated fat and cholesterol. Over time, this may place additional stress on the cardiovascular and metabolic systems. Soy protein, when consumed as part of whole soy foods, tends to fit more gently into the body's long-term physiology. But I must emphasize something very important. This conversation is not about declaring one food completely good and another completely bad. Nutrition rarely works in such simple categories. Fish, eggs, dairy, and moderate portions of lean meats can all play roles in a balanced diet. What matters is the overall pattern and frequency. However, when the goal is long-term health, when the question becomes which protein source supports the body most consistently across decades, plant proteins such as soy appear to offer several advantages. They provide complete protein, they contain protective plant compounds, they support cardiovascular health, and they fit naturally within dietary patterns associated with longevity. After observing nearly a century of life, I have come to believe something simple. The body thrives when food works with it, not against it. And that understanding leads us to the final answer people are always waiting to hear. After 93 years of watching people eat, age, struggle with illness, and sometimes thrive well beyond expectations, I have learned that nutrition is rarely about a single perfect food. It is about patterns that quietly shape the body over many decades. So when people ask me the question at the heart of this conversation, which protein is better for your health, soy protein or animal protein? The answer is not as dramatic as many expect, but it is very clear. Both soy protein and animal protein can nourish the body. Both provide essential amino acids that support muscles, organs, and the countless biochemical reactions that keep us alive. From a purely biological standpoint, the human body can use either source to meet its protein needs. But when we widen the lens and look at long-term health, heart function, metabolic stability, inflammation, and the risk of chronic disease, the balance begins to shift. Soy protein offers several advantages that are difficult to ignore. It contains complete protein, yet it comes packaged with very little saturated fat and no cholesterol. It also brings fiber and plant compounds that support cardiovascular and metabolic health. Animal proteins, while nutritionally dense, often arrive with higher levels of saturated fat and cholesterol, particularly when consumed frequently or in large quantities. Over many years, that difference may influence the health of arteries and the stability of the body's metabolic systems. So, if the question is simply which protein tends to support long-term health more consistently, soy protein often has the edge, especially when it is part of a broader diet rich in whole plant foods. But the deeper lesson is this: longevity rarely comes from a single ingredient. It comes from choosing foods that support the body day after day, year after year. And after nearly a century of living, I have found that the body usually thanks us most when plants take the leading role on the plate.